Welcome back to the Own It podcast. My name is Dion, and in today's episode, we're going to make sure you do not pay too much or you overpay for a property. It's one of the biggest fears buyers have. It's like, oh, I don't want to overpay for a property. Well, I'm going to give you some key signs and how to avoid it and things to do. And if you follow these things, then I can assure you, you will not overpay for a property. So you can feel less stress. You can be less anxious in the marketplace, worrying that could potentially happen. But I will also, by the way, before we sort of get into this whole topic, give a little update with where the podcast is at. We've done 30 odd episodes by the time we film this. We're going to transition from weekly to fortnightly. I mean, if you're someone who listens every week, thank you so much. I really appreciate the support, but it is a lot to keep up with the demand. But there's also not a whole lot of topics to also continue to talk about that we also haven't spoken about. So I want to transition it to more fortnightly based. And I also want to get more guests on. The feedback I get from a lot of people is that the guests or the podcast with guests are more entertaining, of course, because it's a new person. We're talking about different things. And I think that is what we want the podcast to become, especially next year into 2026. But I think 2025 has been an awesome year to build the base of the podcast. And 2026, we're really looking forward to transitioning to fortnightly, having more guests on, giving you more information and giving you a different opinion. I don't want to just to always be my opinion, although I think a lot of the things I say is good, of course, that's why I say them. I also think it would help to have someone else, a different point of view, a different perspective on things, which is always healthy, more experts in fields. But anyway, enough of that, enough of knowing where the podcast is at. I really appreciate everyone's support. But today we're going to be talking about buying properties and avoiding overpaying. And as I said before, overpaying is one of the biggest fear buyers have. So how does overpaying happen? Let's look at it from that perspective. Really easily. There's a couple ways it can happen, but most of the time it comes down to not understanding data or not doing enough research before buying. That's really what it comes down to, or feeling like you have to pay an amount because a vendor simply asks for it. So there's a couple of things to understand right from the start. Just because a vendor wants a price doesn't mean the property's worth that. And just because a real estate agent tells you there's a property that's worth it or should be worth it doesn't mean it's worth it. The onus is on you as a buyer to make sure you don't overpay. And it's important to understand that. A real estate agent's job isn't there. They aren't there to make sure you pay a fair price. Their job is to get their vendor the best price. That's their job in the transaction. So you have to understand that there's actually a lot of responsibility on us as buyers to know how to price and to understand what's fair market value and to also understand when a property is struggling. That's our responsibility. So how do we do this? First of all, there's a lot of indications when a property is struggling. First of all, one of the best things you can look at, and I've spoken about this before on the podcast, is the average days on market. In a marketplace, if you know how long the average days on market is, and this property's been on the market for well more than that, like a long time, then that's a massive indication to you that the market doesn't see value in that property. Otherwise, why wouldn't it have sold? So if the average days on market's 28 days, so a lot of the marketplaces I work in, the average days is 28 days. If I go to a property that's been on the market for 90 days, that straight away is a key indication the property's overpriced. Now, some people say, oh, that could be an indication there's something wrong with the property, not necessarily that it's overpriced. Well, if there is something wrong with the property, then that is compensated in price. So in my opinion, it is overpriced. That is one of the best indications. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter how niche the property is. If the average days on market is a certain amount and the property hasn't sold in that time, it is simply overpriced. Now, I mentioned niche because sometimes people go, oh, it's a very specific property, so it's a specific buyer. Well, the smaller your buyer pool, the less competition, and again, less of the price. So understand, if it's above the average days on market, it is most likely overpriced. But obviously, at some point, that property that's been on the market for 90 days in an average marketplace of 28 days will have been within the 28 days. So then how do you know that property is overpriced? Well, you have to look at the amount of people that also go through the open for inspections, how much activity is there on the property, and also how confident the real estate agent is. One of the best ways to find out if a property is doing well is if an agent is very confident. One of the best ways to know if a property is performing well is how confident a real estate agent is. If they're saying to you, oh, we're definitely going to be sold, and if they're giving you a very transparent, very open story, and they're giving you a lot of confirmation the property will be sold, it is most likely that campaign is doing well. The more transparent I find a real estate agent is, the more likely they are to be telling the truth. So if a real estate agent says the property is going to sell for $1 million, it's going to be sold in 12 hours to this buyer that's doing this with this story, and if you don't make an offer, it's going to be sold. It's a pretty it's a pretty firm stance they've taken. And if they don't come through with that buyer at $1 million, then they're going to have egg on their face because they've taken such a hard stance. They've got no way out of that story. But if you hear a real estate agent saying, oh, we may be selling to a buyer that may be putting in this, and it's all very wishy-washy, or I can't tell you the price, or I can't tell you this, that doesn't necessarily give me a whole lot of confidence as a buyer. So I always say the more confident a real estate agent is, the more transparent, normally the more truth there is to what they're saying. So again, how confident a real estate agent is very important. You have to be able to read those cues. And to get more information and to find out how confident they are, you have to ask more questions. I've done plenty of sort of videos on my socials and on YouTube already about this, or previous podcast episodes we've spoken about this. But how confident a real estate agent is really important. How many people through a property is also really important. Ultimately, a real estate agent is going to put a property out on the market on realestate.com or domain.com. And buyers are the best feedback. If buyers are looking at the photos and they don't see any value or it doesn't pique their interest, they won't attend the open. And so if buyers aren't attending the open, they're not seeing value in the property, which again is a great way for you to work out if a property is performing well or if it's not. So if you go to the first open for inspection and there's one or there's two groups and you, but normally all the other opens you've gone to, there's maybe 30, 40 groups, that is a key indication that all those other 30, 40 buyers that are looking at similar properties looked at it online, but decided there wasn't any value in attending the open for inspection. So again, that is public proof or social proof that the property is overpriced. So you have to be able to read that. Now, this is where I always talk about off markets. Off markets can be such a risky, or not risky, but such a big opportunity for someone to overpay because there is no social proof. And that's when you also have to use data. Everything is supported by data. It's important. You can manipulate data, so don't rely on anyone else's data. Always do your own research. But I always say compare properties that have sold in the last 3 months that are comparable. So same bedrooms, same bathrooms, same land size, same condition. Okay. Or you can, if you can't find those, then you might use properties that are slightly superior and slightly inferior, but you have to then understand you need to balance those out on price. Don't value a property at what you would like to pay. So do not neglect results, or do not only add more favorable results. Add multiple results from multiple prices, look at them all, and then work out what you think it's worth. You should not just be making a decision on how many buyers go through, how confident a real estate agent is in the average days on market. Those are indications on what a property could be worth and if a property is overpriced. But what you come up with in terms of a number should always be supported with data. Always do that. And another thing, I don't know if I've ever spoken about this before, but one thing I do as a buyer's agent, obviously we speak to a lot of real estate agents and have great relationships with a lot of real estate agents. If you have a relationship with someone you know that they've potentially helped you with another property, whatever it might be, always feel free to call another real estate agent. Hey, I know you're not selling this property, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on like what you think it's worth. Or did you appraise it? Do you know any information about it? Making that phone call can get you so much information, and you have a professional's opinion on it, then you can reference that with the amount of data or the data you've put together on sold properties, comparable sales. Then you can look at how many people are going through the open. Then you can look at how many days on the market the property's been on for, and you can see how confident the real estate agent is. And then you can start to ask questions about how many other building and pest inspections, how many bidders are you expecting? And all of a sudden you start to paint yourself a picture on what it looks like. And if all these things are lining up and all of them suggest that the property is worth more than the range, then you're not going to overpay. It's very hard to overpay if everything is suggesting it's worth more, because every other buyer will also be looking at the same thing. But if you're valuing it high, but a real estate agent says it's less and there's no buyers, then that's when you should go, maybe my value's off. Or if you're valued it at a certain price less than that, but there's a lot of buyers and the real estate agent's very confident, and another real estate agent tells you, then your value's off but too low. So you have to understand all these things line up. All these things should be pointing you in one direction. If it's not, potentially you're off with something. But that's how you can sort of balance and work out if you're online with a val, if you're going to overpay. So I hope that's helpful. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about purchasing off the plan properties, because no one talks about it and it's really risky. And I want to give you some information before you go sign a contract. Have a good week. We'll catch you next time.